Welcome back to Real Life Reviews, and in this video we're going to talk a bit about setting up the bike for triathlon. Now, much of the video is going to be weighted towards longer course, although a lot of what we talk about is going to be relevant to all triathlons, and some will mention shorter course. In particular though, I'm going to refer to how this bike, this Argon 18, was set up for me to do Ironman UK 2018. And I'm going to talk you through some of the thought processes that went through my decisions, some of the things that were really good decisions and worked, and maybe one or two that I would change next time. So let's get on with it. First up then, let's just look at the bike as a whole. This is the Argon 18. It's the E-119 Tri Plus. And before I go any further, a massive thank you to Simon and James at Inner Spin Cycles Norwich and the Retool Bike Fitting, James for the fitting, because they're instrumental in sorting this bike out for me, ready and in time for Bolton. One or two issues with timing, but that wasn't their fault. That had more to do with Argon ticking off on things. But anyway, I love it. Why this bike? Well, and there are so many top bikes out there on the market. Well, for me, it comes down to the geometry of the frame. A number of people don't like this bike because it's an uber aggressive setup. However, I have short stumpy legs and a long torso. And what it means is with shorter cranks, I'm running 170 on here, I can get the elevation of the saddle relative to the bars. So the choice of frame came down to my body shape and the fitting that I did with James on the Retool fitting. So the Argon 18, fantastic frame, and I just won't look back on this. Now, a massive plus of the Argon over a number of other bikes is the adjustability that you find in it. Now, lots of bikes will talk about their adjustability, and we'll come on to the cockpit and that adjustability shortly. But with a time trial bike, very often the brakes are under the bottom bracket, they're difficult to get to. On the Argon, the rear brakes are mounted, the seat stays, you've got this wonderful, it goes horizontal and then down. The brakes are mounted horizontally, and it means by removing this cap, you can get at them to work at really, really easily. You also have an adjustment in the side, and that means that you can micro adjust, you can balance your brakes out without taking the system off, the cover off. At the front end, we have a similar sort of system. We have a cover over the brakes for aero, a couple of little bolts to take off to work on the brakes, and an adjustment in the side so I can micro adjust the brake blocks themselves. Front and back, an absolute dream. Add to that they work on a sort of cam system. So here we have wide rims, these are zips, we have 25mm tyres, and the brake blocks are set so that if you need speed for changing, particularly in a shorter course triathlon, you can whip the wheel out quickly, you don't need to adjust the brakes, put the wheel in and go. So a real added bonus to the braking system there. What I will add to this adjustability with the two braking setups that is slightly frustrating is you have a holding bolt, two on the rear, you have two holding bolts on the front, you have an adjustment rear and adjustment front. You have four elements there, and they require four different Allen keys, different hexes. So you have a 4mm here, a 2.5 on top, and then on the front you require a 3 and a 2. A 3 for the adjust and a 2 for the cover, which I've always in the past put a couple of hex keys in my pack ready that I need on the bike, but what this is doing now is it's committing you to pretty much carrying a multi-tool, particularly for your longer triathlons, because there are so many different sizes of hex that's required for this bike. A shame, but that's the balance with the adjustability. Staying with adjustability, the front end cockpit is in many respects, it's very similar to a lot of other bikes. The bars you can move forwards and backwards, you can change the riser height. I'm working on 70mm here, but one of the real beauties of this bike is you can change the riser angle, and you can see from here if we just move in a little bit, I've got this set on a 5-degree rise. Now, that's not a massive rise. The neutral is about a 2 to 3 degrees downwards. So if this was set on 0, there's actually a slight, if you put your spirit level on the bars, it's a slight downwards. So this 5-degree rise isn't much of a rise. It's approximately 2 degrees in reality. But you've got masses of adjustment on the front system there. Another neat touch on this bike is the seat clamp. So again, it's a wedge style, which a lot of bikes are coming to, but what's really neat about this is that the bolt for it is at an angle, which makes it much easier to tighten and loosen rather than those that are vertical and everything gets in the way. Moving up from the seat clamp itself to the seat post, and we see really simple adjustment on the rails and bags of movement for the saddle itself. But not only that, the rail system here, then that can move up to there, back to there. And you can see just from the size of the Allen key and my hand, this saddle can move a long way backwards and forwards. So in terms of fit, there is a huge amount of versatility in this frame, which is why it's so bang on for my weird body shape. That's adjustability then. What about the specific setup for Ironman UK 2018 and how this bike was running? Well, the group set, those of you who don't know it, Ironman UK is pretty hilly, and there's a change to the course this year, and having ridden it last year and ridden it this year, I can put my hand on my heart and say it was tougher this year. So my preparation for that was, we're running a 50-34, we're running a compact on the front. I have toyed with 52-34. I know Shimano don't like it, it's too big a drop, but I'm running a chain catcher, and with a bit of care I've never had any problem with that. Having said that, 50-34 for Bolton this year. This chain is a KMC. Love KMC, and I just find them really easy to work with. And at the rear, yeah, we're running Dura-Race, and for Bolton I'm running an 11-30, and I found that just about right. I was carrying a bit of weight on the bike because we're going long course, and I had all my kit, and we'll talk about what was in my bento box, etc. in a minute. 11-30, gosh, I could probably have done with an 11-32, but I did grind out, and it was, yeah, great group set. Moving back to the front of the group set and the pedals. And some of you might have noticed the battery cover here, and possibly even Garmin on the pedal. I'm Vector 3s. And these are the second version of the Vector 3s. Garmin probably won't want me to call it version 2, but this is the updated with the changes to the battery compartment, etc. And they were pushing out the power for me. Well, actually, they weren't pushing out the power. They were telling me what power I was pushing out. But they were sending the power data up to the head unit just to give me that information. More than anything, that having put some effort in on the hills and hitting the flats again, it meant I could tell myself, stop being a wimp, you can put another 20 watts in, and I could get up to pace. And that's what I really like on the longer course about a power meter. So pedals, yeah, look Keo, because we're on the Garmin Vector 3s. On the rotational side, we're using Zip wheels and the 404 NSWs, which we've got a great review on. Are these the best wheels that could have been there? Well, they're the best I've got my hands on. If Zip wants to send me some 454s, brilliant. If Envy or anyone else wants to send some wheels for me to test. But we rode the Zip 404 NSWs at Bolton, and they were really good. And I love these wheels, so no complaints there. And if we just go up a little bit, what was contacting from the wheel to the ground? Well, we're on the Continentals, the Conti Grand Prix 4000s, S2. Love those tyres, fantastic compromise between puncture resistance and low resistance, low rotational resistance and resistance with the ground. Size, might just make it out, 25mm and running 25mm front and rear. In terms of pressure, I ran 88 on the front, 90 on the rear. it was a hot day. That was probably a bit high, because by the time we were rolling around that course and in that sun, they were a bit higher, and it was a bumpy, potholed course in many parts, and I could have done with a little bit less. Never be afraid to drop your tyre pressure just that tad. Moving up into the cockpit and to the bars for shifting gear, I've got Shimano's double button setup here. The left-hand one is operating the front system, the front chain rings, and the other side is operating the rear cassette. At the moment, it's set up, and I quite like this, in Shimano's semi-sequential. So what that means is that when I shift a front ring here, I get an equivalent kind of opposite shifting at the rear cassette of 2 gears. So if I drop from the large to the small ring on the front, then I'm also going to get an equivalent 2-gear shift on the rear cassette, so that I don't get a big change in what's happening with my pedaling, and it just means I've got to concentrate on one thing. So yeah, we've got Shimano's double button here, but if we now move over to the horns, there we go, and what you'll see on the horn is I've actually got, this is the left hand side, a single button on the right hand side, and these are set up for simply single shift on the rear cassette. Left hand one makes life easy, and the right hand one makes life hard, and it just means that when I'm on a climb, I've just got a little bit of control on the horns. I don't have to come off and use the TT bars. Just drifting back from the TT bars, the head unit that I was using is the Garmin Edge 1000. I'm happy with it. It's quite big, but it does mean I've got the mapping, and particularly on something like a long course like the Ironman UK, I do want the map inside here, so that I've always got that extra little check. This year, one of the pros did a number of extra miles simply because he went the wrong way. However well signposted and marshalled the course is, when you're focused, it's easy to go wrong. So that's the head unit, bags of data shown on there, but also a decent sized mapping, so I can stay on course with a bit of luck. Now behind the computer, we have the Profile Design front hydration system. There's lots of this that I like. What I didn't like is that when this all came from Argon, it didn't come with the rear sort of bento box that comes with it as normal, and I've not been able to get hold of a rear one. Why do I want that? Well, on a hot day like Bolton was this year, that's the ideal place for me to put my salt tablets. Wodge it with a bit of cotton wool, and they're really easy to access and also keep away from the other nutrition. So I would have liked that. The alternative to the Profile Design, I really do like the X-Lab. Is the X-Lab any better? Well, I think the Profile Design water storage is better. It's deeper and shorter for a similar volume, which means when you're tilting up and down hills or tilting your bars, you've got access to more of your fluid more of the time, whereas with a longer system, longer and thinner, when you go up, you're moving it away from the straw. Yes, I know this straw can go back a bit, but it's about balance and getting it right. So the hydration, the liquid storage, I think is better in the Profile Design. Also better in the Profile Design, I think, is their system of how they hold the water in on the top. And if I take the cover off, their top cover comes apart into two, and you can see from here it's got like a splashback system. So it's got 2 levels to what it's doing. Whereas if we look at the X-Lab version of that, if I just move the straw out the way to a degree, then the X-Lab is probably easiest if I take the whole thing out. The X-Labs is a single system. It's a bit thicker, it's spongier, but the Profile Design held the water in even better than the X-Lab, and the X-Lab is a very, very good system. So liquid storage, better in the Profile Design. What's not better in the Profile Design is mounting for the Garmin, and my advice now, because this is simply a rubber mount onto a very bouncy, movie tube and system, that what tends to happen, particularly with a bigger system, is it doesn't take long for it to tilt and end up down. In the middle of your ride, you're trying to move it. It's too easy to catch the screen or the buttons. And I much prefer the mount system that's on the X-Lab, which is much more stable, much more solid. So swings and roundabouts for those two. If I'm to continue using the profile design, I'll probably do something like put the K-Edge TT mount and put it on the side. Aerodynamically, it's probably no different to having this one up there. So swings and roundabouts on the profile design, and a little disappointed that I didn't have the back bento box for it. So moving back behind the hydration system and the TT bars, we have a nice smooth airflow over here. This is the bento box, and this is the cap that covers the sort of head tube system that Argon have. The junction box for the Di2 is underneath here, so massive plus in terms of the cleanliness of the front end and wires not being there. Everything is fed through beautifully, but you do have 3 little bolts that you got to undo to plug in to charge up. To me, that's a small thing. Now, moving behind the bento box, what you will notice with the bento box is that it's if we zoom in a bit, it's not a zip bento box, it's a plastic one, rubberized, sorry, not plastic, and it's bolted to the frame. If you're not using the bento box, well, that's not a problem. You can unscrew it off, and in that instance, Argon provide also a second plate here, which is slightly lower and smooths down and gives you a nice airflow onto the top tube. So really thoughtful system there, again, from Argon. There's a lot of thought gone into this. In terms of my own personal use on the bento box on long course, the bento box for me is for solids. It's for things like cliff shots, the chewy bits, Velo Forte, little bit of protein bar. I'm not good on bars. Salt tablets at the moment. So my solid stuff tends to go in there. Anything else I'm using bottles for, and I've got emergency in my sort of cookie jar that sits behind the saddle. So speaking of the saddle, here it is, my favourite saddle of all time. This is the Cobb 55, often also called the Cobb Joff, J-O-F 55, J-O-F standing for just off the front. Cobb 55, absolutely love it, I get on with it. Saddles though are very personal. I know people that just can't get on with this saddle and get on with other makes of saddle that I struggle with. So, but that's the saddle that I've used, and I use this from sprint all the way up to Ironman, and it's an absolute dream. So much so that I've ordered a second one for my basic road bike because I find it more comfortable on the road. Sat behind the saddle is Argon's proprietary system. Now, I've got 2 water bottle cages here. I've actually swapped out Argon's cages for some Arundel mandibles here, which I find the tightest holding cage around. I've never lost a bottle from them. So I've got a setup for 2 bottles here, and you can access the cookie jar on the fly, because to get in there, it's simply a little rubberized tag, which you just pull and open, and you've got access on the bike, and it's easy then to just flick it over, grab the rubber, and it's on. Just to show you a quick look inside, there we go. The light's not great, but it is there. Got the light on the camera. It is huge, and I'll show you in a moment what I had in there for Ironman UK. So that's the cookie jar. It's a big system, and in theory, that behind you actually aids aerodynamics. So with regard to Bolton, what did I have in there? Well, let me just open up the cookie jar because my hands are full, and I'll put them in. I've already mentioned a multi-tool, and it's really a must on a long course, I believe. With this bike, you need the range of hexes, but in particular, there's a chain split on this multi-tool, and should you require to do something with your chain, then yeah, it's a must. This is the Topeak Hexus 2. Again, that's been reviewed before. It does hold its own 2 tiny little tyre levers, so we'll pop that in there. Despite the fact that it has its own tyre levers, I did also have, nice and handy, 2 tyre levers in my cookie jar just in case. Hardly any weight, and I just find them easier to use, so in they go. I had 3 gas canisters. Worst case scenario, I hope, 2 punctures and 1 muck up in trying to get the canisters done. So canister, canister 2, canister 3, in it goes. In addition to the 2 canisters, I also had my chuck. Again, Genuine Innovations Air Chuck Elite. Love it. I think it's brilliant. I think it's the best on the market. Really light. Just going from memory, I think it was 17 grams, something like that when we weighed it. The great chuck. In he goes. Plus a couple of cable ties, one slightly bigger than the other. You never know. And cable ties are, well, my best friend in so many things. In it goes. I mentioned earlier, about chain splitting. KMC chain, one of the reasons why I like it, and a little pack, a couple of missing links so that we can sort the chain out. Gotta be, no point having everything else if you can't put the chain back together. And then 2 inner tubes. Again, Contis, you will notice, if I just pull them apart, these are the long valve variety, so I don't have to worry about extensions. They go straight in, no problem whatsoever. So that's what I held in there. I also had a couple of gels, caffeine gels, as real emergencies. Sorry, I'm lying. I had 1 caffeine and 1 electrolyte gel, SIS ones, because I can get on with those. I had a couple of those gels in there as well. This cookie jar holds a ton of kit. And the danger is that you will be doing that and towing a ton around you. Not quite literally, but it can get heavy quickly. So you do need to be careful. That's for an Ironman. Obviously for something shorter, much shorter, I wouldn't be taking 2 inner tubes. I wouldn't be taking probably the complete multi-tool. I'd be just taking a punt on things. But Ironman, there's a lot more about finishing it and making sure I want to finish it. Whereas in a shorter distance race, well, maybe I'd DNF if it was a bad thing. I'm not going to spend 15-20 minutes sorting out a mechanical on a sprint distance triathlon. So yeah, the cookie jar, it's big. Be careful you don't overload it. And when you're training, it's something you might want to stuff a rain cape in, because everything will rattle around in there. However well you pack it, it doesn't take much of a bump to get that rattling and making some noise. So I've mentioned solids in the bento box. I've mentioned backup in the cookie jar behind the seat. What about fluids? Well, lots of options on this bike. What you might have noticed is you've got no bosses on the seat tube, and that's for aerodynamic reasons. But there are 3 bosses on the down tube here for fitting a bottle and having it up or down. Now, my original thought for Ironman Bolton was I would have my Elite aero bottle here, and this would be full of gels, electrolyte gels, and I would drink from those once every 30 to 40 minutes, have a good swig. And then on the rear, I would have 2 spare. So I was even contemplating not going with a bottle there. My front would have nice electrolyte solution in it, and that would get me comfortably to the first aid station, which would be at about 15 miles on the Bolton course. I could then grab a bottle. I could even grab 2 bottles if need be. I could top up with isotonic or water in the front. I could keep the bottle in the back to use more of it later, not overfilling and wasting. And I could even end up with 2 bottles on the rear. I changed my mind with the heat and the build-up a few days beforehand. And basically, I dispensed with the idea of having my gels in the Elite because I thought I would need more. So the way I started was I had a bottle with 10 SIS electrolyte gels, and then with a little bit of water added in, mixed up, just to make it easier to drink. That sat behind me on the seat there, and again, 30 to 40 minutes, good swig. Was that a good decision? That on its own was a great decision. What was a poor decision was I dispensed with, for aero reasons, because I wasn't going to use it for the gels, I dispensed with this bottle and obviously the caging as well. And I had moments where I was a little bit dry, and I could have done with a spare bottle. And in fact, actually what I could have done with is a normal cage on here with the ability to pick up an extra bottle at an aid station, stick it in and have the water there. So yeah, lesson learnt there. Hot weather, Ironman distance. I needed more versatility. I could have done with 3 cage points for bottles, especially bearing in mind that I was filling one up all the time, one of the cages, with my gel solution. That was my main energy input fluid wise. There we are then, the Argon 18 E-119 Tri Plus, as ridden by myself in Ironman UK 2018. If you've liked the video, please give it a good like, a thumbs up, and share. You might want to consider going through our website if you want to buy any of the kit that we review on the channel, where we've got a number of affiliate links and you can get some great deals there. And every time you buy through those links, Real Life Reviews gets just a tiny bit to help keep the channel going. There's also a link to Wiggle in the description down below. So, link to the website is just down there. Link to subscription, just there with the round picture. Maybe you want to have a look at the review on the Genuine Innovations Air Chuck Elite, that's just up there. And also, the wheels here, well, review's just up there. Many thanks for watching.